So here to present to you now our mill levy certification. So mill levy certification, before we get into the detail, is an annual process conducted every December in order to certify the tax rates that will be applied in property tax collections for the following calendar year. So this is a normal process we undergo every year. However, we are in a unique situation because of something called mill levy correction, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that further complicates it a little bit in the current situation. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in addition to the normal process. So we'll first start with just a general summary of our different tax bills. We have more than just the School Finance Act or mill levy overrides that you need to be aware of. Go through that mill levy correction, which is applicable to the School Finance Act only. Just a little tutorial on how to calculate mill levies, helpful for you all as you are certifying the taxes, but then also for our public viewing if they want to calculate that impact on their own, either residential or non-residential property. The recommended mill levies that we ask for you to certify this evening, and with some of that reference, how that's changed over the course of time for both our residential and non-residential. So to begin with those school tax bills, there are 4 different types of school tax bills that a property taxpayer would see on their property taxes that they pay, both for our residential and non-residential. The first one is the School Finance Act local share. So the School Finance Act is a combination of local and state sources of funding, and a large portion of our taxes is dedicated towards that. We will talk about what you see there as House Bill 2014-18 tax credit and net levy through the course of the next few slides. But just know that that amount that we're asking you to certify will be 26.44 mils. We then have 5 separate mill levy overrides. So our overrides, as written in the ballot language approved by the voters of Douglas County, exist in perpetuity. They do not sunset. And so we have authorizations that were approved by voters in 89, 97, 2003, 2006, and most recently the 2018 mill levy override. So those total to 73.7 million. 40 million of that is from that 2018 mill levy override. The next type of tax that you'll be certifying tonight is our bond redemption tax. So that is allowed by statute in order to pay off the debt service from our general obligation bonds. So when we receive that funding up front from passing, such as the 2018 bond that was for 250 million, that is the debt service in order to pay that off, as it is not paid off from our general fund. It is a total separate funding source of property taxes. And then finally, the last type of mill is our abatement, which is allowed also by statute, which is for the district's proportional share of property taxes that have been abated and refunded by Douglas County. So I want to just give you a little bit of history, and we're going to go back about 30 years here. So back in the 90s and early 2000s, many school districts, including Douglas County school districts across the state of Colorado, obtained voter approval to retain and spend School Finance Act dollars in addition to in excess of their property tax revenue limits set by Tabor. What this meant when they had this voter approval is that they were detabering their School Finance Act. So this passed for Douglas County School District in 1998, along with the majority of school districts in Colorado doing it in this kind of 2-decade period. So once a school district is detabered, they are permitted by the voters who detabered to keep the local property tax mill levy in place at the time of that detaber vote. However, the Colorado Department of Education interpreted the statute to say that some detabered districts should have reduced their local property tax mill levies through 2007 until in 2007, they froze them through legislation. So when they did that and CDE made that interpretation, what that did was it reduced districts' mills below the amount that their voters had authorized. And so it is now clear, decades later, that that should not have been the recommendation from CDE, and that school districts were actually undertaxing and should not have reduced their tax rates. So after that frozen legislation, there was no longer this reduction in the School Finance Act mill for DCSD and other school districts. But what that essentially happened and what it contributed to was that the local share of the School Finance Act contributing to the total program formula was overall reduced, and that went down, and the increase on the state to fund the difference went up. And so legislation was taken over the last 2 sessions to restore, moving forward, this erroneous recommendation that was brought upon school districts. So school districts did not do anything wrong. School districts were advised by the Colorado Department of Education to do this, and we are asked by state law to now correct this issue moving forward. So mill levy correction is state law. We are obligated to set the mills at the rate in which CDE says we must set those mills as set by law. And the local school board must do this in accordance with the total program in order for us to receive that funding from both the state and the local taxpayers. So to look at basically the last 18 months or so in terms of what does this mean for our taxpayers in the current year's property taxes that have pretty much been collected, and then this upcoming year based upon the certification that will occur tonight. So there's kind of a few phases, 3 phases of this. So the first phase was the passage of House Bill 2014-18. So this was in spring of 2020, which basically indicated that school districts would need to look at 3 different parameters and determine which one was applicable to them. And so the bill that was set, which was in order to correct this error, said each school district will have a new mill levy target that is the lesser of 3 options. The first option is the mills required to fully fund the district with local property taxes, meaning no state funding. The second option is the mills in place at the time that the district obtained voter approval to detabor, or 27 mills. So you pick the lesser of the 3. I'll walk through on a future slide what that means for DCSD. So the next step that occurred was a year ago in December of 2020, our school district certified temporary tax credits in order to hold the amount taxed to our taxpayers flat at the previous amount, but to show a tax credit on their property taxes for 2021. So school districts did this, including us, which for us will show what that meant. There was a separate line added into the tax bill for the tax credit. And now past the step 3, which came this most recent legislative session, House Bill 21-1164 states that CDE must implement a correction plan for school districts to, as quickly as possible, but not more than 1 mill each property tax year, reduce those credits to get school districts to the amount that they should be taxing for their mill rate. So for DCSD, what applies and what does this mean for us? The lesser of the 3 options is 27 mills for us, which is a good thing. We're not far away from that. Just to walk you through the others, if we were to be fully funded locally, meaning no state assistance, that'd be 76.397 mills. That is because the over 50% of our funding is actually from the state share, which we see quite common in large metro districts. The amount when we detabored in 1998 was 35.122 mills. So that was also higher than the 27. And so we are not subject to that part either. So the temporary tax credits is that difference between where we were in 2019 before all this passed at 25.44 and that new target of 27. So last year's certification included a tax credit of 1.56 mils. So now in order to fully fund the mill as stated by CDE as quickly as possible, but no more than 1 mil a year, that means that our certification amount will be a mill of 26.44 this December. So we'll have a temporary tax credit of 0.56. And then next December, we will be at 27 mills with 0 temporary tax credits. And then we'll be finished. And that will be the new amount that we're frozen at under current legislation. So I want to show what this means to the average residential taxpayer, because again, this is something that was voted upon by Douglas County voters back in 1998. Many of us probably weren't property owners in Douglas County back in 1998. I know I sure wasn't. But this is something we are all obligated to participate in. So if we go back a year ago, and we'll just assume for ease of the numbers, property values are the same. The average residential property value in Douglas County per the assessor's office is $558,000. Apply that by the residential assessment rate, that's 7.15%. That gets an assessed property value of just under 40 grand. So that 40 grand is what you're paying the taxes upon. So that mill rate last year, so that was with the full temporary tax credit, was 0.02544, which meant that the school property tax bill was $1,016. So holding that value of the home the same residential assessment rate to get to the same assessed property value applied by 1 mil greater, that increases the school property tax by $1,056. So this average homeowner would pay an additional $40 a year in their school property taxes towards the School Finance Act due to this legislation. So big question is, where will this money go? We are generating more dollars locally. How does that affect our schools, and how does that affect the state's budget? So the estimate from the state, so this is from Legislative Council and Joint Budget Committee, indicated that it would raise approximately $90 million statewide for this fiscal year. These are funds that will save the state on their state share, holding all else equals if they didn't make any changes to the formula, in order to decrease their burden of paying a portion of the School Finance Act. However, what will be done this year, as set within the School Finance Act, is those dollars will go towards the enhancements that were added to the formula and the factor changes added to increase funding for at-risk and English language learner students. So the formula for the current year added for the first time reduced lunch students and added additional funding for English language learners that we didn't have previously. So the state was able to do that utilizing what they were saving in basically the local share picking up a larger percentage. So what's important to know from this is it's not a dollar for dollar back to each school district that is generating the increase in local property tax. It's just keeping it within the K-12 budget. So that's just an important thing for you all to know. So to summarize, because I know this is complicated information, I was on the steering committee with CDE to put out the materials and I still find it confusing. But the main takeaways I'd like you to have on this first part on the mill levy correction is that this is a legislative and legal directive. We really don't have a choice about this. This is a historical under collection, and it is not going to be retroactively applied. This is just correcting moving forward, despite the number of years that it was incorrectly taxed. It is a phase-in approach. Some school districts are as much as 18 mills away from their target. So it's going to take statewide 18 years to correct this issue. We're fortunate that it's just going to be 2 years for us. And finally, that the funds generated will result in more funding for education, which obviously is a positive statewide. So if you would like more information on the mill levy correction, presented a longer presentation that was actually designed by the Colorado Department of Education to the Fiscal Oversight Committee last week. That is linked here within your materials if you'd like to see some of the material that they've prepared. And then I've also linked in some informationals directly from CDE that are not custom to our district, but it gives some more information about how this was something that was at an erroneous recommendation from the state. So as we move into those 3 other types of taxes that we have, wanted to give an example as to how to calculate that tax rate. Because with the School Finance Act, we're working with a fixed tax rate and determining annually what that is going to result in terms of property taxes. So we're working in the reverse when it comes to our mill levy overrides and our bonds. We know how much we want to generate in taxes annually, so we have to back into that tax rate. So what we do in order to calculate that is we look at what is the amount we have voter approval to generate. So our total mill levy overrides all added in is about 73.7 million. We divide that by the assessed value. We actually have a little sliver of Elbert County as well. So it's not just, if you were to look on the Douglas County Assessor's website, it's not just the Douglas County assessed value. So we do that math, and that gets us to that mill rate. So that is applied across each one of the individual mills, as well as the bond and the abatement tax. So these are the mills that we are recommending you certify this evening. So we have within here the 2021 recommendation, and then the mills that were certified last December compared to the mills certified the December prior to that. The reason why I wanted to show 3 years is I wanted to show what it looked like before there were the temporary tax credits with that first year, the temporary tax credit, and then what we're asking for your vote on tonight. So the total levy that we are asking for certification on is 43.797, which is an increase from the prior year, largely due to that 1 mil increase in the School Finance Act, but part of that is offset by having a lower mill on the mill levy overrides, because we're working towards a fixed dollar amount, and we have an increased property value, which means a little bit less per dollar of, I say not dollar of property, but per residential property taxpayer or non-residential. So what does this mean for our average residential taxpayer? So again, using that average home value and the amounts as presented by the assessor's office for the prior years, and we are on an odd year assessment update. So that's why you see the same amounts for 2 years in a row. Getting to that residential assessed value by applying that residential assessment rate to determine the mill levy rate applied by that assessed value to get the residential taxes paid. So this, you will see there is that increase in residential taxes from 1,633. So this is inclusive of all the taxes, not just the School Finance Act, up to 1,750. Know that our business community will be interested in theirs as well. There's a different assessment rate for the non-residential. It is 29% instead of 7.15. And so a non-residential property using a comparable business value will have a different assessed value. And so using the same tax rate, because the tax rate is the same, that shows the non-residential taxes paid. So on a comparable value, on a comparable value to the average residential value, the non-residential taxes paid will increase from 66.23 up to 70.96. So the final slide is the action that we are requesting this evening. So we're asking that you vote this evening to certify the mills as recommended by staff with the associated resolution. We'll then take those signatures and submit it as soon as possible to the respective counties. And that is legally due to both counties tomorrow. That is the date set in law. So this meeting worked out perfectly, but some years, just for your future reference, we have to do a special meeting for this if a regular board meeting does not occur in a 5-day window between the 10th and the 15th.